yeah, I should have things turned down enough, so let's see how this goes. This is an hour and 46-minute video. It's going to take me a while to do.
Hello, and welcome back to the only channel asking the hard-hitting questions, like, how much weight can Wingardium Leviosa lift?
It's Leviosa, not Leviosa.
Apparently, 63% of you think it can lift at least a train, which brings me to the topic of today's video. I'm going to be looking at...
It's actually kind of an interesting question, because, I gotta have to Google this my own here. It's technically, let's see, Wingardium. When cast correctly, this spell makes objects levitate. That's all. So technically, hold on. Hold on. It actually, hold on. Goes a bit further. Yeah. So just object weight shouldn't start with the lighter objects like feathers, but the spell can eventually be used on heavier items. So I mean, technically, I'd say there's no limit, but it would be down to the wizard.
some of the most common spells used in the Harry Potter universe, and give them a ranking from 1, which is basically a harmless party trick, to 5, something that has the potential to destroy the world, maybe, or at the very least, unravel society as a whole.
Oh, well done.
So here's the criteria. 1, harmless party trick. 2,
Okay.
mildly abusable. 3, society bending. Things that make you wonder, why isn't everyone doing this? 4, collapse risk. This should be causing really substantial problems, but it's not for some reason. And lastly, 5, which is basically apocalypse. End of civilization stuff and the spells that should probably be causing it. I know someone's gonna comment, like, it's just magic, don't worry about it. Yeah, obviously, I know, it's a fictional story, but what's the fun in that? So, restrain yourself, and let's jump into the first one. Transfiguration magic.
Sure.
When I was making this list, I originally had a couple different spells that were transfiguration type of magic spells, but ultimately, there doesn't seem like there's a lot of distinction between any of these spells. Some do certain things that others don't, but in the end, they're all kind of based on the same thing, which is turning one thing into another. And
Okay.
there's not a lot of distinction between all of those things, so I figured I should probably just talk about them as a whole, because the more I looked at them, the more problematic they became. At the very beginning, the first introduction we have to Transfiguration is in Harry's first year with Professor McGonagall. She says that Transfiguration is some of the most complex and dangerous magic you will learn at Hogwarts. Anyone messing around in my class will leave and not come back. You have been warned. Then she changed her desk into a pig and back again. They were all very impressed and couldn't wait to get started, but soon realized they weren't going to be changing the furniture into animals for a long time. That sort of sets the stakes.
All right.
Transfiguration can do a lot of things, including turning a desk into a pig, and potentially much more. So let's explore some of the worst case scenarios, and then we'll end up at a ranking for this. First
Sure.
is what I would call a risk of economic collapse. So the obvious topic is like creating gold. I think this is something that's restricted in some way. You'll often hear Gamp's law thrown out as a restriction for this. People couldn't create gold or things of value, but really the only limitation that's explicitly mentioned is creating food. A lot of people seem to interpret some of the other laws as gold or life or souls or something like that. But I think there's a bigger question here, which is...
So the big thing here is that, like, when it comes to, like, wizard money, that's all dealt with when it comes to the goblins. They're the ones who actually enchant it and make it so that you can't duplicate galleons. So even if someone tried to do that, it would get back to the goblins or to the ministry, and they'd go to hunt those people down.
is sure, maybe they can't make gold, but they could certainly make lots of things of value and still use them. On the extreme end, you have something like oil or some sort of like plastic material, something that can be used as a commodity and drops the value of these goods to 0 because the supply becomes infinite. There's not really an indication of...
But see, this is where it's like this is where it turns into obviously you have the people who will be selling things like that where they make something kind of neat and then they're able to duplicate it. But the idea of like trying to bring this to the Muggle world, that just doesn't work.
whether or not things that are transfigured ever fade or return. In fact, in a lot of cases, it seems like it's permanent. Sure, I can't transfigure something into gold unless I have the Philosopher's Stone, but it seems like I could probably make like other useful materials and then sell them. Gamp's Law, I guess, covers this again, but it's really not clear. It definitely doesn't go into detail about global commodity trading markets. Maybe
Obviously.
the jury's still out on that one. The other potential would be for a bad actor to do something truly truly terrible. You could probably turn the air into poison at a pretty broad scale. The chances of
That
someone
one's
being a
kinda-
bad actor seem pretty substantial in a way that would constantly put society on edge. We have an example of a terrorist, which is Voldemort, and he doesn't do something like this. So you have to assume that there's some sort of limit here. Like, you probably can't turn all of the air in a city into a neurotoxin or something. So there's presumably some kind of limit. But there's plenty of
The other part of that too, though, is if there's actually a spell for it. That's the big thing. Is you can't just. It's not like you're able to just point your wand at something and turn it into whatever you want. Like, there's generally spells that do specific things.
other things that you could turn into weapons. Like, you could turn trees into living soldiers, like Lord of the Ring Ent style. I don't know. Really, this is just potential for like a more interesting combat system in Harry Potter that we never see, except for maybe at the very end when McGonagall turns all the statues to life, and then they kind of don't seem to do a whole lot. Really, the topic I actually wanted to get into is this sort of biological horror story about this all, which is the idea that Transfiguration seems to be able to potentially create life and sentience. We'll look at the source material so you don't think I'm crazy, but I think things that are transformed seem to retain echoes of their original form. For example, in Goblet of Fire, maybe not, Thomas, but believe me, you need all the preparation you can get. Miss Granger remains the only person in this class who has managed to turn a hedgehog into a satisfactory pincushion. I might remind you that your pincushion, Thomas, still curls up in fright if anyone approaches it with a pin. So that's obviously going in reverse. That's turning a living thing into an object. It's kind of the worst case scenario I can imagine. It seems to imply that when you transfigure something into a stationary object, it's still living, which is horrific. But it also makes you wonder about the reverse.
Okay, but no, the the point there was that he'd actually failed to turn into a pincushion completely because the pincushion was still having fears that the animal would have. He was supposed to remove all that by turning into just a pincushion by itself.
McGonagall turns her desk into a pig. You have to imagine that that pig has some sort of life force to it. Otherwise, like, what is it doing? Maybe it's an illusion. That's your sort of easy way out.
This is the magic trick, huh?
This transfiguration is not an illusion. Again, I'm actually look up to see if there's a spell for that. McGonagall. See, desk into a pig. Desk into pig. It was a transforming spell that turned desk into pigs. It was relatively advanced. That's about it. We do have this. During the 85-86 school year, Professor McGonagall used the spell to demonstrate her immense magical talent to Jacob's siblings and their classmates. Unimpressed, Marula Snide tried to use the spell, however, her wand backfired and she accidentally turned her nose into a pig snout. Pretty much all we got on that. So, like, we don't have too much information on it in general.
Illusion, Michael.
It's not actually living, it's just an imitation of life. While that's
But the fact that the person's spell backfired and turned their nose into a pig's nose tells you you're essentially just transforming an object into something that it looks similar enough to a pig. I wouldn't say if it actually has life or anything, or if you could eat it, who knows.
possible, it sure doesn't seem like what's happening. The other problematic part about Transfiguration is that it seems to be permanent. This is from the Tales of Beedle the Bard, which says that Animagi do not retain the power of human speech while in their animal form, although they keep all their human thinking and reasoning powers. This, as every schoolchild knows, is the fundamental difference between an animagus and transfiguring yourself into an animal. In the case of the latter, one would become the animal entirely, with the consequence that one would know no magic. They'd be unaware that they had ever been a wizard, and would need somebody else to transfigure them back to one's original form. Which also seems to imply that you could turn someone into an animal, or
Yes.
like a chair, and throw them into the woods. They'll
Yes.
never be seen again.
Yes.
Unless someone stumbles across a chair in the woods and thinks that could be a person. I don't know how
Right.
anyone's going to find that or realize that in the first place. Like, you could also turn them into a rock, because there's precedent for that as well. Barty Crouch Jr. in Goblet of Fire Dumbledore told me to go look for my father. I went back to my father's body, watched the map. When everyone was gone, I transfigured my father's body. He became a bone. I buried it while wearing the invisibility cloak in the freshly dug earth in front of Hagrid's cabin. Clearly, there's not a whole lot of limitations here, and you can turn someone into something very small, which kind of breaks all other laws of physics, and that's kind of beside the point. You can turn someone into something much smaller and just
I mean, the point of magic is to break laws of physics in general.
bury it, or throw it in the ocean, or launch it on a spaceship in outer space. There's not a whole lot of things you couldn't do with this. Transfiguration as a whole seems to break pretty much every law of nature that we have, with the exception that maybe Gamp's Law comes in and saves the day and plugs the plot hole that is this branch of magic. You can't make food, you seemingly can't create wealth. That seems unclear, though. And
Again, with the wealth thing, that all comes down to goblins and the fact that they enchant money so that people can't duplicate it and just become obscenely rich. Now, when it comes to the Muggle world, they could do shit like that, but the Ministry is meant to try and step in and stop that kind of shit.
And also, this whole branch of magic seems very skill dependent. You have to be a pretty powerful wizard to perform some of these feats. First,
Yes.
your students aren't going to be doing something insane, but there's also plenty of adult witches and wizards that don't have good intentions that could do pretty bad things without all that much effort. Overall, I'm going to kick this off with a 4 out of 5. I don't think it's necessarily going to like rip a hole in the space-time continuum. We'll get to that later. But I do think it has a lot of problems, and it probably should be a bigger issue in the wizarding world.
Probably.
The age line charm.
Really? Sure.
I made a post a while back asking for some of your suggestions about spells to include in this. A lot of them were already on the list, and I will get to them. One that I thought about but was not going to do, but put back in because of a comment, was the Age Charm line. This is the one that shows up in Goblet of Fire. It's the charm that Dumbledore puts around the goblet to try to stop Harry from putting his name in the Goblet of Fire. To ensure that no underage student yields to temptation, said Dumbledore, I will be drawing an age line around the Goblet of Fire once it has been placed in the entrance hall. Nobody under the age of 17 will be able to cross this line. In Age Line, Fred Weasley said, his eyes glinting as they all made their way across the hall to the doors into the entrance hall. Well, that should be fooled by an aging potion, shouldn't it? And once your name's in the goblet, you're laughing. It can't tell whether you're 17 or not. What could be the problems with an age line? Off the bat, I think it's an incredibly niche spell. It does something incredibly specific, and honestly, it's pretty easy to circumvent. So it's really only stopping people below a certain age from crossing a point in space. It doesn't seem to affect other people, other adults.
This overall, though, would be kind of a cool thing for the world in general, right? So like it stops people from going into areas that they're not supposed to go into if they're under the age and stuff like that. It's nothing crazy, but it's kind of neat.
Spells, you name it, it seems to have some limitations. And it's pretty easy to bypass. You just find someone to go through the spell for you. It's a little bit like a law stopping underage kids from buying beer at a gas station. You just find an adult to go buy it for you. I was trying to think about what's the most extreme case here, and I guess someone exceptionally powerful like Dumbledore could cast an age charm that would stop everyone beneath 100 years of age from passing it, so essentially blocking everyone. But that seems needlessly theatric to the point where it's like, just make a magical wall there that they can't run through. You don't need to do...
It would be the opposite of it, actually, is, yeah, if you want to trap people in it, you could put an age line around, like, an entire building and be like, oh, you have to be, you know, you can only cross the line if you're over, yeah, as you put 100 years, that'd be kind of funny. So now just a bunch of people are just trapped inside a building and can't do anything.
Do this age magic around it. Just stop them in the countless other ways that you could with magic. And really, even in the worst case scenario, it doesn't seem to cause any lasting problems. It makes Fred and George like grow beards, and
It's like overall, and no, if I recall, the age line didn't cause them to grow beards. It was, well, it might have been, but it was also the fact that they took the aging potion. That was part of it. Anyway, well, the age line charm could technically be used to just kill people.
temporarily get older, but it's not like a permanent, it doesn't kill you. So I don't think it's really all that problematic. To the point of one of the commenters, it probably would put a bunch of bars out of business. I also don't think that like a powerful enough wizard would be stopped by it. If Dumbledore put a line on the ground that was supposed to keep Voldemort out, I just get a sense that he would have a spell to counter it in some way. All in all, I think this one falls very cleanly in the tier 1 category, which is really just a party trick. Does it stop people? Could it stop some underage kids? Yeah. Is it gonna break the world? Doubtful. 1 out of 5.
I disagree. I think it could go higher than 1 out of 5, simply because you could use it to kill people. You could. Like, oh, someone falls asleep and they're, you know, someone that they're 25 years old. Now you just draw an age line around them that they have to be a certain age to go over, and now they, you know, are stuck.
Avada Kedavra. Alright, so the spell you've probably been waiting for. Avada Kedavra.
Not really.
Someone yelled at me for saying Kedavra, Kedavra. We all know what it does. It's instant death if it connects. Surely I would put it in category 5, right? Not so
No.
fast. Let's take a look at it first. By all accounts,
Not
Avada
even
Kedavra
close to category 5.
is undetectable. It just ends someone's life. Meanwhile, in the village of Little Hangleton, a maid was running along the high street screaming that there were 3 bodies lying in the drawing room of the big house: Tom Riddle Sr. and his mother and father. The Muggle authorities were perplexed. As far as I'm aware, they do not know to this day how the Riddles died. The Avada Kedavra curse does not usually leave any sign of damage. The exception sits before me, Dumbledore added with a nod to Harry's scar. At its core, Avada Kedavra is a murder spell.
Yeah.
It's an undetectable, easy kill spell, but that's pretty much all it does. Yes, there's a ton of use cases if you were like an assassin trying to topple a government, but at the end of the day, we have guns and that doesn't tear the world down around it. So as far as I'm concerned, I don't think Avada Kedavra is any different than any other thing we can do to kill people. So, and in a lot of ways, it seems worse than things that we've invented. There doesn't seem to be like a multi-casting version of Avada Kedavra. You can't cast it on 200 people at once, so it's really pretty like rate limited. It also has the same limitations that bullets would have, i.e. physical barriers. I have nothing more to say to you, Potter, he said quietly. You have irked me too often, for too long. Avada Kedavra. Harry had not even opened his mouth to resist. His mind was blank, his wand pointing uselessly at the floor. But the headless golden statue of the wizard in the fountain had sprung alive, leaping from its plinth and landed on the floor with a crash between Harry and Voldemort. The spell merely glanced off its chest as the statue flung out its arms, protecting Harry. Clearly there are ways to block it in the same way that you could block a bullet. It has limitations. It's not just a free-for-all that would...
The problem is trying to fling stuff in front of it means you literally just have someone just trying to constantly throw stuff in front of you, so that's not really a way to block it.
It has no counter. There's a seemingly outstanding question about whether you could conjure physical objects to block the spell as well, which would really take the fear down a notch of this spell. It's always...
Yeah, no, conjuring things, they would be conjured. I can't imagine that would work, because otherwise people would just be constantly conjuring things in front of them.
It's talked about like it's unstoppable, but maybe through transfiguration you could sort of conjure up a chair in front of yourself and it would block the spell. Jury's out on that one too. The other barrier here to sort of ending society as a whole is this intense barrier. Avada Kedavra is really quite difficult to cast on someone. You have to, as far as I can tell, truly be a psychopath. You have to really want to do it. We see this in Goblet of Fire with Mad-Eye Moody, Imposter Mad-Eye Moody. Avada Kedavra is a curse that needs a powerful bit of magic behind it. You could all get your wands out now and point them at me and say the words, and I doubt I'd get so much as a nosebleed. You truly have to want to kill to be able to do this. A lot of other spells could cause someone to die without you having to have the intent. You could stupefy someone and they could fall down on the ground, and that could have the same effect, and 10-year-olds know how to do that.
Trifficus totalis.
11-year-olds, not 10.
I think it's pretty niche and not quite as problematic as you might first imagine. I'm gonna give it a 4, only because I do think there's a problem in that while there is a skill and intense barrier, everyone has a wand. There's not really like a background check that you have to do to get a wand. That I think could be problematic. Otherwise, it has some limitations. So
I like the word. I like the word you're using here. It has some limitations. Oh, you mean the complete lack of care for somebody? Yeah, that's kind of a big limitation.
4 out of 5. Accio. This is an interesting one. First, the groundwork. The best use case here is from Goblet of Fire, when Harry summons his broom during one of the Triwizard Tournament challenges. The crowd was making a great deal of noise, but whether friendly or not, Harry didn't know or care. It was time to do what he had to do, to focus his mind entirely and absolutely upon the thing that was his only chance. He raised his wand. Accio, Firebolt, he shouted. Harry waited, every fiber of him hoping, praying. If it hadn't worked, if it wasn't coming, he seemed to be looking at everything around him through some sort of shimmering, transparent barrier, like a heat haze, which made the enclosure and the hundreds of faces around him swim strangely. And then he heard it. Speeding through the air behind him, he turned and saw his Firebolt hurtling toward him around the edge of the woods, soaring into the enclosure and stopping dead in midair beside him, waiting for him to mount. Goblet of Fire, Harry uses Accio for the first time. He's been practicing and finally...
Well, I mean, not the first time he's been using it plenty.
It's time for the big moment, and he brings Firebolt to him so that he can win the challenge, and the rest is history. But that's a pretty crude use of the spell. I want to point out one other instance where it's used by Sirius Black. That's right, said Sirius encouragingly. Come on, let's all have a drink while we're waiting. Accio Butterbeer. He raised his wand as he spoke, and half a dozen bottles came flying toward them out of the pantry, skidded along the table, scattering the debris of Sirius' meal, and stopped neatly in front of the 6 of them. They all drank, and for a while, the only sounds were those of the crackling of the kitchen fire and the soft thud of their bottles on the table. That's an example of Accio being used with a lot of precision. It gathers multiple objects and places them pretty neatly directly in front of the people at the table.
This is one of those things where it's it very much comes down to wizards and actually practicing things. Like obviously with Accio, he knew where the butterbeer was and everything, so he was able to pull them in, and using his own wand, he's able to
different locations. So surely this opens up the door for a lot of different potential exploits, right? We also know that it can move clothing on a person, so you could indirectly move a person through moving their clothing. Yes. It can also apparently move small creatures, but not humans. There also seems to be some ways to block the spell from working. Wonder Book of Spells tells us that Flatworthy did not believe in working and declared that the only dignified thing to do was to Accio more gold. This he attempted to do by pointing his wand in the direction of a nearby goblin workshop. In one sense, his plan worked. Several exquisite pieces of goblin jewelry, as yet unfinished, so without anti-theft charms upon them, came soaring into the windows of the Accio Knights' headquarters. This implies that there is some sort of way to counter Accio, so you can't just summon anything you want, and really things of great value would definitely have some sort of counter spell placed on them. You can't just steal every artifact in the world. They would presumably be protected. I was pretty much ready to give this like a 3 out of 5.
Everything in the world, though, I mean,
When I came across one other quote that kind of flipped the whole thing on its head and changed my mind entirely. It comes from a quote from J.K. Rowling, so this is all a bit of a grain of salt situation, but hear me out for a moment. She says, Accio only works on inanimate objects. While people or creatures may be indirectly moved by Accioing objects that they are wearing or holding, this carries all kinds of risks because of the likelihood of injury to the person or beast attached to an object traveling at close to the speed of light. So close to the speed of light. I don't really honestly know if it fits into my framework anymore, but immediately the first thing I thought about was this XKCD comic about the what would happen if you pitched a baseball at the speed of light. It basically turns into a nuclear bomb. The idea
Yeah, no, her saying speed of light was close to speed of light was just fucking stupid.
of Harry Accioing Firebolt and a relativistic missile coming at him from Hogwarts, and yeah, technically he probably wins the challenge in some way or another, but he could have potentially nuked all of Hogwarts, so I don't know if that makes him the winner or not, but it certainly makes Accio a spell worthy of a higher tier in my ranking system. Obviously, this isn't true. We can see it, like, even in the text and in the movie version, both of them, the broom comes to Harry at a broom-like speed, so obviously this isn't coming towards him at the speed of light. That would be a ridiculous thing, and
Like, yeah, let's be honest, nothing in the series ever flew to them that fast, ever. So I don't know why she said it like that. It was just stupid.
so I don't really know why she said it, because it's obviously not true, but I'm going to rate this spell as if using it creates a intercontinental missile capable of wiping out an entire city. I can't remember the name of it. There is an opposite to Accioing something. There's like a banishing charm. It might just be called the banishing charm. Presumably that does it also at the speed of light. So you could banish a little pebble or a baseball towards a target at the speed of light and create...
No, we're not going the speed of light here.
You get it,
No.
a bomb. At the end of it all, this is one of those things that clearly she's just saying without any understanding of what she's saying. Object moving at the speed of light would be... I mean, there's also some cool applications for it. I guess there's like a Harry Potter set in space spin-off that wasn't on my bingo card, but space travel Harry Potter, I guess, is something that HBO could be cooking up. Realistically, it turns magic into weapons of mass destruction in a way that there could be no conflict anymore because it'd be like mutually assured destruction. That doesn't even get into the fact that this is a spell that Harry knows at age 14. It's not even barred to the most talented wizards in the world. It's accessible to middle school children. So yeah, it's a problem. Probably a level 5 world-ending, earth-splitting problem. So I think that's where I'm going to put it. If you don't believe what J.K. Rowling says, maybe it's like a 3. But if you do believe what she says, it's a 5. It's honestly, it's like a 6. It's beyond what I could possibly rank.
Yeah,
Let's just
no,
leave
we're
it
not
there
going
and move on
to
to the next one. Before we move on, if you're liking the video, click the like button or click the subscribe button. If you want to see more of this type of content, leave a comment, all those things. Appreciate it. Yeah, that's it. On to the next one for real this time. All right, on to the next one. We're going to be... What? Oh. I can't avoid it. Here it comes. It's time travel magic. I really don't want to talk about time travel. It's probably the most annoying part of Harry Potter, if I'm honest, and it wriggles its way in every video that I ever make. But we're going to talk about it again. First,
Let's talk about it.
Mainly about the time turner. I actually have less and less of a problem with the time turner as I go on. Is it problematic? Yeah. Should she probably not have included it in the story? Yeah, probably. But like the way that time turners work, it is kind of just a single line of time. There's not any sort of going back to rewrite the past. So I don't have too many problems with it, except for the fact that as I was digging around, of course, I came across some problems. Time travel in Harry Potter was okay because it was contained. Whatever was going to happen was going to happen. It adheres to what I think would be called the Novikov self-consistency principle, which is if an event exists that would cause a paradox or any change to the past whatsoever, then the probability of that event is 0. Basically, if Harry wanted to go back and stop Voldemort, and that would cause a ripple effect through the future, the probability of that happening would be 0. There's no way to materially affect what's yet to happen. And
I think actually a good episode of a show that did this was Supernatural, where this when they first meet Chuck and they have one of his books, so they're reading a bunch of stuff about what they're supposed to do and everything, so they try doing other stuff, and what happens is the stuff that is written down in the book ends up happening anyway. Like they avoid doing stuff, then it happens anyway. It's just really damn funny.
And that could be for a number of reasons. It might be that like Harry goes back to try to stop Voldemort, and as he approaches Voldemort, he trips and falls and knocks himself out. It could be some change of heart, anything. Something would stop him in some way, shape, or form from altering an event in the past that would have ripple effects on the future.
Right.
This is essentially how the time turner works. Everything that Harry does has already happened because he has already done it. It's a closed loop. Great. Except for the fact that Pottermore actually has a whole entry about time travel magic that exists outside of the time turners, because of course it does. And of course there are spells that break every law of consistency or coherence that you might have come to expect from time travel magic in Harry Potter. All attempts to travel back further than a few hours have resulted in catastrophic harm to the witch or wizard involved. It was
So essentially, the time travel that we have in the book is the kind of travel you have when you actually follow the laws that they put in place. So the time travel that happened, like this kind of stuff, this is why they started making laws.
not realized for many years why time travelers over great distances never survived their journeys. All such experiments have been abandoned since 1899, when Eloise Mintumble became trapped for a period of 5 days in the year 1402. Now we understand that her body had aged 5 centuries in its return to the present and was irreparably damaged. She died in St. Mungo's Hospital for Magical Maladies and Injuries shortly after we managed to retrieve her. What is more, her 5 days in the distant past caused great disturbances to the life paths of all those she met, changing the course of their lives so dramatically that no fewer than 25 of their descendants vanished in the present, having been unborn. Yeah, this pretty much is the exact thing people complain about with time travel magic with Harry Potter, that everyone's kind of like, yeah, that's a problem, but it's not actually a problem, because that's not how Harry Potter does time travel, except that it is. This is the way that time travel works in Harry Potter.
Right, this is where I have to point out to people that the entire reason that the Time Turner has a set time limit and the fact that it has hundreds of laws is because of those examples.
But for the time turner, they just narrowed it to a small little snippet of time that is somehow contained to this single timeline thing. Realistically, it seems that there is a spell that allows time travel, and it creates the paradoxes that everyone complains about it creating. First of all, if she traveled back 600 years, there'd be like 20 to 30 generations impacted in the year 2000, so there'd be way more than 25 people disappearing. There'd be like thousands and thousands of people affected by this. I think there's a couple different scenarios here in the time travel logic. A, you can travel back in time and change things, but it branches off into a different timeline, and that's how you avoid the paradoxes. B, the actual way that it works in Prisoner of Azkaban is that it's a single line of time, and you can't really change anything. You can think of time as a flowing river, and if you put a rock in there to divert the stream, it would just go.
Let's point out, yeah. So it's when going with how the laws are supposed to be, it's just a loop
Around it and return to the natural timeline. The last option is that paradoxes happen. And if that's the case, there's a whole mess of issues that happen. So first, the branching thing. Imagine, for instance, that Harry goes back to stop Voldemort. So he goes back, he gets to age 18 or whatever, travels back in time to the night that his parents are killed by Voldemort, and stops him somehow. He alerts Dumbledore, who rescues him, they incapacitate Voldemort, kill him, I don't know. What happens then? At that point in time, it would branch, right? There would be timeline 1, where Voldemort continues on, and timeline 2, where Harry goes back and stops him. Does the Harry that traveled back stay in that branched timeline? So is there now 2 Harrys in timeline 2, or does he somehow magically teleport back to timeline 1? Both have different problems. If he's in timeline 2, then there's 2 Harrys, and that's got its own host of issues. Because anyone can do this. Remember, it wouldn't just be Harry. Anyone can do this magic. If you can imagine thousands and thousands of wizards all traveling around creating paradoxes, I think the whole world would explode. Also, if time branches, then there's a moment when Harry goes back where time splits, and then there's a world where Voldemort still exists in the future that Harry doesn't exist in. And so is his Horcrux tied to a Harry in a different timeline? This is like some Marvel multiverse stuff that, like, who knows? I honestly don't know what grade to give this. It's clearly a 5. It's probably a 6. I don't really know. It's kind of like Schrodinger's.
I wouldn't even put it as a 5, maybe
spell.
a
I think
4.
4 or 5 on this list destroy reality in a sort of causal way. They're like forward-facing and don't introduce paradoxes into the universe. Most of them don't really do all that much damage except for, Accio faster than light relativistic missiles. I'm gonna give it a 5, only because of all the headaches that it causes me as I'm battling with people in the comments about this kind of stuff. So 5, just out of spite, and also this series shouldn't have time travel in it, period. So next one, Wingardium Leviosa.
This ring
is
is
like a spell
fun.
that essentially kicked off this idea for the video because it's not very clear what the spell does. It either
It levitates objects.
does a little bit, or it does an insane amount of lifting that isn't reconcilable. Some people think the best they can do is lift something like the troll club that Ron and Harry lift in Philosopher's Stone. Others think it could lift as much or more than a train. How much bigger could it get? There has to be a limit here. Otherwise, this is ridiculous.
Well, let's point out that that Hermione obviously was able to easily do the feather, and then when Ron does it on the Trolls Club, Ron's not straining over it or anything like that. He, did the spell, and the club is floating. So, yes, technically this could just be used on anything.
Ridiculous spell. So I think the clearest, most realistic example of it happens in Deathly Hallows when Harry is in the midst of the Battle of Seven Potters. In desperation, Harry pointed his wand at the sidecar and shouted, "Wingardium Leviosa." The sidecar rose like a cork, unsteerable but at least still airborne. He had but a split second's relief, however, as more curses shrieked past him. The 3 Death Eaters were closing in. "I'm coming, Harry," Hagrid yelled from out of the darkness, but Harry could still feel the sidecar beginning to sink again. Crouching as low as he could, he pointed at the middle of the oncoming figures and yelled, "Impedimenta." The Jinx hit the middle Death Eater in the chest. For a moment, the man was absurdly spread-eagled in midair as though he had hit an invisible barrier. One of his fellows almost collided with him. Then the sidecar began to fall in earnest. The remaining Death Eater shot a curse so close to Harry that he had to duck below the rim of the car, knocking out a tooth on the edge of his seat. I think this is the most obvious example of what this spell does. It seems to just sort of lift things uncontrollably. Harry lifts the cart that he's in. He doesn't lift
I would say you could probably control it if you're good enough with it.
himself, but the cart becomes basically a bobbing cork in water. It's not a flying machine that he's enchanted. There's other limitations.
See, it's not a flying machine. Like you can't. I wouldn't say you could use it and like actually just fly off into the sky with something. I wouldn't say that. It's just meant to lift the object.
As pointed out in some other source material like the Wonder Book, the new demonstration was initially much more successful than the first. Hogwarts showed the onlookers how he could lift a variety of objects ranging from small rocks all the way up to fallen trees. Now, that's a huge range as well. A tree is not quite the size of a train, but it's still a potentially very large object. The only distinction that any of this makes seems to be that it's impossible to cast it on a human, which would mean you can't just make yourself fly or make somebody else fly. But it also seems like there's some control possible, because in Deathly Hallows, Ron
Also, it's not flying; it's levitating.
also cast this on a little twig. Ron looked around and directed his wand at a twig on the ground and said, "Wingardium Leviosa." The twig flew up from the ground, spun through the air as if caught by a gust of wind, and zoomed directly at the trunk of the willow's ominously swaying branches. It jabbed at a place near the roots, and at once, the withering tree became still. Maybe he can control it because it's a small branch versus when Harry just lifts the huge sidecar that he's in. Maybe the weight determines what's possible in terms of control, but none of this really explicitly calls out the limit of how much or how large of an object can be lifted. Worst case scenario, you could cause some damage with this. You could drop heavy objects on things or people or whatever.
Sure.
I think you need to maintain concentration for the spell to continue working. Harry in the sidecar is a perfect example. As soon as he starts being distracted, the sidecar begins to fall. So it's not something you can just indefinitely keep up and defy gravity and reality in that sense. It takes effort and concentration to do so. The one thing I wanted to point out that just becomes more and more apparent as you dig into this stuff is that like there's a ridiculous amount of redundancy here. Hermione hovers Harry into a bed when he's like knocked out in a different situation using a hover charm, which seems to be distinct from Wingardium Leviosa, but it's like another hyper-specific spell that does one specific thing. There's also a flying charm for brooms, which is distinct, and maybe it's distinct from the one that Arthur Weasley casts on his car to make it fly. Then it begs the obvious question about brooms of like, if it's the same spell, why is one broom better than other brooms? Does the spell get better? Is there someone casting it more effectively on something? And there's also the issue of the fact that when Arthur Weasley's car flies, it also seems to be sentient to some degree. I don't know if that's part of the spell, but it is actively
that's a totally
and
different
consciously
thing.
making decisions. That's not really the point of this topic, but it is something that you just start to notice more and more. There's like 17 spells that do exactly the same thing or some slight variation of the same thing. It almost feels like none of this was really all that planned out at the end.
So let's look up the Hover Charm. Hover Charm. Let's see, blah, blah. The Hover Charm is a charm which made the target hover in midair for a brief period of time. It was one of the many lesser variations of the levitation charm. So it's just a version of it. This is what makes it levitate. There are a number of lesser variations of levitation charms, such as the levitation spell, the hover charm, the rocket charm, and the floating charm. What's the rocket one? Here's rocket object high into the air. Interesting. Yeah, there's more just, you know, a lot of similar spells.
What grade does it get? I was like on the verge of giving it a 1, but I do think there's some versatility and like utility that you do get out of the spell that makes it a little bit.
And then there's nothing that says there's any weight limit at all. So yeah, this is definitely something you can like lift up huge things and drop them down for
So
big
I'm gonna
stuff.
land on a 2 out of 5 for this one. In the most realistic sense, you could create some sort of like perpetual energy machine, but when you have magic, I think there's way easier ways to do that than with like floating a ball and dropping it repeatedly. So I don't think there's that much of a problem with this spell. I'm giving it a 2 out of 5. Alohomora. Okay, a very simple spell that actually has quite a bit wrapped up into it that is maybe less about the spell and more about J.K. Rowling's world building ability, but let's get into it. So Alohomora obviously unlocks things. The healer pointed her wand at the door of the Janus Sticky ward and muttered Alohomora. The door swung open and she led the way inside, keeping a firm grasp on Gilderoy's arm until she had settled him into an armchair beside his bed. So the spell opens doors, seemingly ones that have maybe been magically locked, but not physically locked, or maybe some combination. It's quite confusing. There's like 3 different spells that all do the similar thing, just like what I was just talking about. So the other one is Colloportus, which closes doors, and I think stops you from physically opening them, but you could magically open them. And then there's also an anti-Alohomora spell, which stops Alohomora from working. Maybe doesn't stop you from physically busting the door down. I don't know. It all seems a little bit redundant and semantic, but whatever. The thing I actually want to talk about is the origin of Alohomora. J.K. Rowling claims that it's a West African word that means friendly to thieves, which on the surface, whatever, it seems whatever. But this comes from a transcript of a lawsuit between J.K. Rowling and another group trying to publish what I think was essentially a Harry Potter encyclopedia, and she doesn't want them to do that. So the quote is, J.K. Rowling said it came from a West African word that meant friendly to thieves, and not the Hawaiian aloha, as mentioned by the lexicon, the thing that she's suing. In cross-examination, David Hammer asked her if she had ever said publicly or told Steve Vander Ark the derivation of the word. She said there's a much easier way to find out, and that is to do some actual research. That's fine, except for the fact that this doesn't seem to be true at all. This seems entirely made up. It's not based on a West African word. It's actually a Malagasy word from Madagascar. She claims that it's from Sidiki, which is a West African name, which is not true. She probably meant Sakiti, a form of divination practiced in Madagascar. Sakiti itself is not a name, but a divination practice, within which there is a figure known as, I think, Alohomora, which means diviner, crowd, mob, grief, or trouble. You basically cast a die or draw lines or something like that, and you see these figures
very off
that
subject
have some
here.
sort of meaning. Alohomora is one of these figures that can loosely be translated maybe to the interpretation of friendly to thieves or trouble head, that type of interpretation. Maybe she just sort of mixed things up at the time of testimony, but it's strange when it's in a trial about the origin of the word to get your own origin incorrect and then claim that they just have to do research to understand it the right way. Maybe that's a separate issue. Let's move on to Colloportus, which is the opposite. It seems to make doors so they can't be opened, even though they can be opened with Alohomora. Colloportus, shouted Harry, and he heard 3 bodies slam into the door on the other side. It doesn't matter, said the man's voice. There are other ways in. We've got them. They're here. Harry spun around. They were back in the brain room, and sure enough, there were doors all around the walls. He could hear footsteps in the hall behind them as more Death Eaters came running to join the first. Luna, Neville, help me. The 3 of them tore around the room, sealing the doors as they went. Harry crashed into a table and rolled over the top of it in his haste to reach the next door. Colloportus. This is a separate spell that seems to do the opposite of Alohomora, except
Aaron, you would be surprised how hard
that Alohomora can't be used, because you would assume if the guy crashed in the door, he would have just cast the spell that opens it.
Okay, so Alohomora unlocks a lock. The spell Harry is using basically means that the door couldn't be moved, I guess is the best way to put it.
This is either the same or different than the next one on the list, which is the Anti-Alohomora spell, which is invented by a wizard named Blagden Blay because he got robbed 19 times in a day or something. This is also called out separately in Order of the Phoenix when Harry is trying to break into Umbridge's office to use the flute. And how are you going to get there in the first place? Harry was ready for this question. Sirius's knife, he said. Excuse me? Christmas before last, Sirius gave me a knife that'll open any lock, said Harry. So even if she's bewitched the door so Alohomora won't work, which I bet she has, then his knife will work. Clearly there's a way to protect against it. I don't know if it's different than the Colloportus spell, which seems to just be a spell that's based.
Okay, hold on. I gotta go back to know how to spell this damn word.
Next door.
Okay. Oh. Password, right? Alright, so let's go back again. Colloportus, there we go. So Hermione using it, she's Colloportus, Gasparini, and the door sealed itself with an odd squelching noise. Interesting. Okay, so yeah, no, those actually can, yeah, it can be undone with Alohomora. But even still, like yeah, when we look at like with this, they obviously know where they have the tree, or they know where they have them, the part of mystery. So it's not like they did to.
The
Get in
next
there,
one on the list,
I
which is the Anti-Alohomora spell, which is invented by a wizard named Blagden Blade because he got robbed 19 times in a day or something. This is also called out separately in Order of the Phoenix when Harry is trying to break into Umbridge.
Yeah.
Protect against it. I don't know if it's different than the Colloportus spell, which seems to just be a spell that's based on shutting doors. Seems a little bit useless, but whatever. In Half-Blood Prince, they tried to open the door again with Alohomora. Alohomora, he said confidently, pointing his wand at the padlock, but nothing happened. That won't work on these, said Tonks. Dumbledore bewitched them himself. There's clearly ways to protect against Alohomora. It might be an Anti-Alohomora spell, it could be Colloportus. There's also a fourth spell called Aberto, which only gets used in the movies, and I think the only role for this is to open a door and not to unlock one, which feels like the most useless spell you could possibly have, but I guess we have which the only Aberto Alohomora spell, it could be Colloportus. There's also a fourth spell called Aberto, which only gets used in the movies, and I think the
see Aberto, opening charm. Open doors. Queenie tried to use a spell to gain entry to the office. After a regular unlocking, charm failed to work. However, the spell also failed. So it's possible that it's just simply a stronger spell for unlocking.
The only role for this is to open a door and not to unlock one, which feels like the most useless spell you could possibly have, but I guess we have motion sensing doors and it's not all that different. So anyway, at the end of all this, Alohomora doesn't seem to work past like book 2 on anything. I'm gonna give it a ranking that corresponds with that uselessness, and I'm gonna give it a 2. Overall, not a great spell. Useful.
Really,
more than
a
just
2 out of 1?
but not that great.
Interesting.
Aberration. This was a pretty common suggestion. Aberration is essentially the Wizarding World's version of teleportation. It's
Yes.
instantaneous, it can transport you vast distances, though there are some limits, and it seems to not really require all that much skill. It seems to hinge on what's described as the 3 Ds: destination, determination, and deliberation. The important things to remember when apparating are the 3 Ds, said Twincross: destination, determination, deliberation. Step 1, fix your mind firmly upon the desired destination, said Twincross. In this case, the interior of your hoop. Kindly concentrate on that destination now. Step 2, said Twincross, focus your determination to occupy the visualized space. Let your yearning to enter it flood from your mind to every particle of your body.
Honestly, it's like stuff like this. Let your yearning to enter it flood from your mind every particle of your body. Yeah, no, I
Step 3,
never
said
apparate.
Twincross, only when I give the command, turn on the spot, feeling your way into nothingness. Move with deliberation. This is when they're first learning how to apparate, and even though it takes some time for people to learn, it doesn't feel like it takes all that much skill to do. They're teaching it to essentially 16-year-olds. It's like driving a car. Dangerous maybe, but everyone learns how to do it. It also seems to make a noise, a crack, or a bang when people do it. Unless, of course, you're Dumbledore and you're really good at magic. A man appeared in the corner the cat had been watching. Appeared so suddenly and silently, you'd have thought he just popped out of the ground. The cat's tail twitched, and its eyes narrowed. This was also book 1, though, so I don't even know if J.K. Rowling had a name for apparition at that point. Regardless, we see it in later books as well. Voldemort and Dumbledore both can apparate without making any noise whatsoever. So there are the similar problems with this that you have with any other means of causing chaos or destruction. Basically, it'd be a great assassination tool, but past that, I think it has a lot of limitations that really stop it from being as problematic as you might initially assume. For one, there's huge limitations on the distance that you can apparate. Apparation becomes increasingly unreliable over very long distances, and only highly skilled wizards are wise to attempt it across continents. That said, J.K. Rowling says cross-continental jumps actually might kill you. Apparation becomes increasingly risky over long distances, as with most magic, much depends on the skill of the spellcaster. Apparation requires knowledge of the terrain to which one is moving, or the ability to visualize it clearly. Cross-continental apparation would...
I feel like this one could be somewhere you could easily set up like ways to know where you're going. I feel like the movie Jumper would kind of weigh in on that one a little bit.
Almost certainly results in severe injury or death. So maybe only the most powerful people could even try this to begin with. Although, that said, we have a different instance where Voldemort could have apparated but chose to fly instead. This happens in Deathly Hallows when Harry is at Malfoy Manor and Voldemort's coming to get him. Harry knew it. His car was bursting with the pain of it, and he could feel Voldemort
So this is flat, like we know that like Voldemort basically could not apparate that far.
flying through the sky from far away over a dark and stormy sea, and soon he would be close enough to apparate to them, and Harry could see no way out. There's clearly a range wherein it doesn't make any sense for you to apparate, or it's so dangerous that you shouldn't, even if you're Voldemort or Dumbledore, which puts a pretty hard limit
Let's be honest, like even Voldemort knew that there's things he could not do.
on how much damage this could really do. And speaking of damage, let's get into what happens if you do it wrong. Splinching seems to be the main problem. The second attempt was no better than the first. The third was just as bad. Not until the fourth did anything exciting happen. There was a horrible screech of pain, and everyone looked around terrified to see Susan Bones of Hufflepuff wobbling in her hoop with her left leg still standing 5 feet away from where she had started. The heads of house converged on her, there was a great bang and a puff of purple smoke, which cleared to reveal Susan sobbing, reunited with her leg, but looking horrified. Splinching, or the separation of random body parts, said Wilkie Twincross dispassionately, it occurs when the mind is insufficiently determined. You must concentrate continuously upon your destination and move without haste, but with deliberation. I would assume that the problem with traveling a long distance is that you would be splinched to a degree that you could not return. I don't know what happens if, like, you splinch a vital organ, and I would assume that the further you go, the more likely that kind of issue could happen. With that in mind, I think what realistically happens with apparition is that most wizards and wizards probably just avoid it because of the dangers. They use things that are probably safer, like traveling through the fireplace flu networks, or flying on a broom, or something that doesn't have a risk of death if you get distracted at the last moment.
And British does point out that most wizards just prefer to These other methods.
The only people we see doing it are essentially soldiers in the wizarding world, and Aurors and the wizard cops. Normal people don't seem to do it quite as much. There's also ways to block apparition. Famously, Hogwarts is a place that you can't apparate in and out of, so Dumbledore has some sort of spell that can block it. So there's all kinds of limitations here. The one question I really do have is, I feel like you could chain apparitions together. You might not be able to apparate across a continent, but couldn't you just apparate like a mile at a time and do it in quick succession? I don't think it'd be all that much of an issue. Clearly, you can go a decent number of miles within one jump. So even if you go 30 miles and then rest for 10 minutes and then go 30 more miles, you're still going way faster than a broom probably goes. So you could do it, rest, do it again, and you travel quite quickly. All that said, it's probably safer to just go through the Flu Network or like take a train or something.
So yeah, if you're somebody who's actually like good at apparating, then obviously, that's something that would be pretty damn useful.
Realistically, I'm giving Apparition a 3 out of 5.
Not bad though. Yeah, be a fun video to do though.
I don't think it causes